She's clearly uneducated. Look at her. Probably never finished high school. This is exactly what's wrong with hiring in this country." Harrison Vale's voice carried across the entire private dining room of Le Cine Noir, the most expensive restaurant in Geneva, as he gestured dismissively at the black waitress refilling water glasses 6 feet away. Around the table, 7 of the most powerful executives in European finance sat in absolute silence. The deal they had flown in to close was worth $200 million. The contracts were on the table. The pens were uncapped. The waitress, a slim woman in her early 30s named Adeyeze Okonkwo, did not flinch. She finished pouring Mr. Akihiko Tanaka's water. She set the carafe down. She straightened her apron. And then, in a voice as steady as the candlelight, she said 7 sentences in 7 languages, each one addressed to a specific person at that table. By the time she reached the 7th sentence, Harrison Vale's $200 million deal had already collapsed. He just didn't know it yet. 5 years earlier, Adeyeze Okonkwo had arrived in Geneva carrying 2 suitcases, a battered copy of her dissertation, and the precise quiet of a woman who had survived something she did not intend to discuss with strangers. She was 31. She had a doctorate in comparative linguistics from the University of Cambridge, where she'd specialized in West African diasporic language transmission. She'd been raised in Lagos by a father who taught classical literature at the University of Ibadan, and a mother who ran a small import-export business that quietly traded with 7 countries on 3 continents. Adeyeze had grown up speaking Igbo and English at home, Yoruba and Hausa with the neighbors, French in her Catholic primary school, and Mandarin in the after-school program her mother had insisted on because, in her mother's words, "The future does not speak the language of the past." By the time she finished her doctorate, Adeyeze was fluent in 11 languages, conversationally proficient in 4 more, and could read academic texts in 19. She had been on a tenure track at a respectable European university. She had also, 18 months before that night in Geneva, lost her husband and her 4-year-old daughter in a car accident on a wet road outside Cambridge that she had walked away from with 3 broken ribs and a kind of silence inside her chest that did not lift, no matter what country she moved to or what work she found. The waitressing job had not been a fall. It had been a decision. After the funeral, Adeyeze had not been able to face a lecture hall. She had not been able to face graduate students. She had not been able to face the slow, careful work of academic writing, which her husband had read every draft of, and which now felt like a language she had stopped wanting to speak. So she had resigned her position with grace, paid off the small mortgage on the flat in Cambridge with the life insurance money, and moved to a city where nobody knew her name. She found a 1-room apartment above a watchmaker's shop in the old quarter of Geneva. She found a job at Le Cine Noir, which paid well enough and asked her only to be quiet, efficient, and invisible. She wore her hair pulled back. She did not correct people who assumed she did not speak French. She listened. She learned the wine list. She learned which patrons tipped and which did not. She learned, very slowly and not all at once, how to breathe again. Harrison Vale was 63 years old that night in Geneva, and he had spent 40 of those years convincing himself that the world had given him everything he had because he deserved it. He was the founder and chief executive of Vale Capital Partners, a New York-based private equity firm with $11 billion under management. Yale, undergrad. Harvard MBA, Forbes 400 list for the last decade, hovering around $1.4 billion depending on the quarter. 3 properties. A wife who served on museum boards. 2 grown children he saw at Christmas. He had built his firm on a particular kind of aggression that the financial press had once called decisive, and now, more cautiously, called unrelenting. His employees called other things, mostly in private. He had a reputation, well earned, for humiliating people in meetings. He believed that humiliation was a productive tool. He believed that the people who could withstand it were the people who deserved a seat at the table. He believed, although he would have denied it if asked directly, that the people who happened to sit at his tables looked a particular way for reasons that had to do with merit rather than with accident or history. The deal he had flown to Geneva to close was the largest single transaction his firm had ever attempted, a $200 million joint venture with a consortium of European and Asian investors to acquire a Swiss-headquartered logistics company that controlled critical shipping infrastructure across the Mediterranean and the Indian Ocean. The consortium had taken 9 months to assemble, 7 principals from 6 countries, a Japanese trading house, a German industrial family, a French investment fund, a Brazilian agribusiness conglomerate, a Saudi sovereign wealth subsidiary, a Nigerian banking dynasty, and Vale Capital, which had positioned itself as the lead American partner and the deal's structuring architect. The closing dinner at Le Noir was meant to be a formality. The terms were agreed. The contracts were drafted. The pens were ordered. All Harrison had to do, by his own staff's careful pre-dinner briefing, was not say anything that would cause anyone at the table to remember why they did not particularly enjoy doing business with him. For 2 years, Adese had worked the private dining rooms of Le Noir at least 3 nights a week. She had served princes, prime ministers, retired generals, opera singers, fugitive bankers, and at least 4 men whose names she'd recognized from international war crimes tribunals. She had developed a particular set of small habits. She listened. She remembered. She did not correct mispronunciations. She did not laugh at jokes that were not funny. She did not look surprised at numbers that were obscene. And she had developed, over those 2 years, a very precise sense of which patrons saw her and which did not. The ones who saw her tipped well, made eye contact, asked her opinion on the wine. The ones who did not see her tipped poorly spoke past her as if she were a piece of furniture with a pulse, and occasionally said things in front of her, in English or French or German or Italian, that they would never have said had they suspected she understood. Adese had a small notebook in her apartment in which she wrote down certain phrases she overheard. She did not know yet what the notebook was for. She knew only that the keeping of it felt important, the way keeping a list of survivors of a flood feels important even when you do not yet know who will come asking. Harrison Vale did not see her when she brought the bread course. He did not see her when she poured the first wine. He did not see her when she described in careful English the provenance of the seared foie gras. He looked through her each time with the same flat, untroubled gaze men of his particular wealth had been looking through women like her for several centuries. The other principals at the table noticed her in different ways. Mr. Tanaka, the Japanese trading house representative, thanked her quietly in English each time she served him. Madame Fontaine, the French fund principal, asked her a question in French about the wine and was pleasantly surprised when Adese answered with the regional accent of the Loire Valley. The German industrialist, Herr Kurger, said nothing but nodded slightly each time she set down a plate. The Saudi delegate, a careful man named Faisal al-Rashid, made eye contact once and looked away with the particular discretion of a man who had been raised never to make a service worker feel observed. The Brazilian, the Nigerian, the Italian, each of them registered her in their own way. Harrison did not register her at all. Then, between the 3rd and 4th courses, the conversation turned briefly to a topic Harrison Vale considered safe: the difficulty of finding good people in the modern economy. He launched into it the way he launched into all of his favorite monologues, with the loud, easy confidence of a man who had not been interrupted in 20 years. He talked about meritocracy. He talked about standards. He talked about how the diversity initiatives at major American companies had, in his view, lowered the caliber of new hires. He used the phrase "day nonsense" twice. He noticed, dimly, that the table had gone quieter than it had been a moment earlier. but he interpreted the quiet as agreement rather than as the particular European silence that occurs when 7 sophisticated people are simultaneously calculating whether the man speaking is about to embarrass himself badly enough to require a reconsideration of the deal on the table. He was warming up. He gestured for the waitress to refill his wine. She did. He did not look at her. "Take her, for example," he said as Adeze stepped back from the table. He gestured with his wineglass in her direction without turning his head. "She's clearly uneducated. Look at her. Probably never finished high school. This is exactly what's wrong with hiring in this country. They put people like her in nice restaurants because of optics, and the rest of us have to pretend it's normal. In my day, you needed credentials to work somewhere like this. Now you just need to check a box." He took a long sip of his wine. He set the glass down. He looked around the table, expecting the small approving nods he was accustomed to receiving from men who did not want to disagree with him. He did not receive them. Mr. Tanaka had set his chopsticks down very carefully on the rest beside his plate. Madame Fontaine's mouth had become a thin line. Herr Kruger was looking at his hands. Mr. Al-Rashid had turned his head almost imperceptibly toward Adeze, with an expression of grave, formal attention. The Brazilian had put down her water glass. The Italian was staring at Harrison the way one stares at a man who has just lit a match in a room one has been told contains gas. The Nigerian, Mr. Eze, who had grown up in Lagos and had recognized Adeze's accent the first time she'd said good evening in his hearing, had begun to smile in a way that was not friendly. Adeze had stopped moving. The water carafe was still in her hand. For 2 full seconds, she did not speak. She used the 2 seconds to make a decision she had been not quite making for the entirety of her 2 years in that restaurant, and that she now understood had been waiting for her all along. She set the carafe down on the sideboard. She straightened her apron. She turned to face the table, and in a voice as calm as the candlelight, she began to speak. She spoke first to Mr. Tanaka. She spoke in Japanese, in the formal register appropriate for addressing a senior executive of a trading house older than the United States. She said, "Forgive me, Tanaka-san, for interrupting your meal. I hope you have found the foie gras to your liking. I noticed earlier that you preferred the unsalted bread, and I have arranged for an additional portion to accompany the next course." Mr. Tanaka's eyes widened slightly. He inclined his head. He replied, also in Japanese, "You are most gracious." "Thank you." She turned to Madame Fontaine. She spoke in French, but not the international French Madame Fontaine had heard from her earlier. This was Parisian French, with the precise diction of a woman who had read Proust in the original at 15. She said, "Madam, you mentioned earlier that you found the Sancerre slightly too acidic. I have taken the liberty of decanting a pouilly fume from the cellar for the fish course. I hope it will please you." Madame Fontaine's hand had gone very still on the stem of her glass. She turned to Herr Kruger. She spoke in German, in the southern Bavarian register of the city where he had been born, and which he had not heard spoken correctly by a stranger in a foreign restaurant in his entire life. She said, "Herr Kruger, your office contacted ours yesterday regarding your dietary restrictions. The chef has prepared a separate preparation of the lamb for you. It will not contain rosemary." Herr Kruger looked up. He looked at her. He said, in the same Bavarian register, "Thank you, my dear. That is most considerate." She turned to Mr. Al-Rashid. She spoke in Arabic, in the classical register of the Quran, which was the register a Saudi man of his particular generation would have heard from his grandfather, and which he had not expected to hear from anyone in a Geneva restaurant, ever. She said, "Saidi, peace be upon you. I am aware that the wine pairings this evening do not include you. I have prepared a selection of non-alcoholic infusions from the kitchen garden, and the next will be brought to you shortly." Mr. Al-Rashid placed his right hand briefly over his heart. He inclined his head. He said, in Arabic, "Peace be upon you. May God reward you." She turned to the Brazilian principal, Senhora Carvalho. She spoke in Portuguese, in the carioca cadence of Rio de Janeiro, where Senhora Carvalho had grown up. She said, "Senhora, I noticed you have not touched the cheese. The chef has prepared a small queijo Minas to follow, if you would prefer something from your region." Senhora Carvalho laughed once, a short, astonished laugh, and put her hand to her mouth. She turned to the Italian, Signor Ricci. She spoke in Italian, in the Milanese register of the financial district where he kept his office. She said, "Signor Ricci, the espresso following the dessert will be from your family's roastery. Your assistant arranged it last week." Signor Ricci made a small sound that was not quite laughter, and finally she turned to Mr. Eze, the Nigerian banker, who had been waiting for her with his hands folded carefully in his lap. She spoke in Igbo, in the dialect of the village outside Onitsha where she had been born, and where, by some statistical coincidence so improbable that neither of them would ever quite stop laughing about it, Mr. Eze's mother had also been born. She said, "Na mu dewo." "I welcome you. The dessert tonight is mango. The mangoes were imported this morning. They are not as good as the ones we grew at home, but they are the best you will find in Switzerland." Mr. Eze closed his eyes for one full second. When he opened them, they were wet. He said in Igbo, "My daughter, thank you, may the road rise to meet you." Then Adeyese turned, finally, to Harrison Vale. She did not speak in any of the 7 languages she had just used. She spoke in English. She spoke quietly. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "Mr. Vale, my name is Dr. Adeyese Okonkwo. I hold a doctorate in comparative linguistics from the University of Cambridge. I am fluent in 11 languages and read academic texts in 19. I have been a waitress in this restaurant for 2 years because my husband and my daughter were killed in a car accident, and I needed work that did not require me to speak in front of people I cared about. I have served you 4 times in those 2 years. You have never looked at me. You have never asked my name. Tonight you decided, on the basis of nothing but my face, that I was uneducated." She paused. "I am not the person you have insulted. The people you have insulted are sitting at this table. I would very much like to bring you the 4th course now, if you are still planning to eat it." She did not wait for an answer. She picked up the carafe. She left the room. The silence she left behind lasted exactly 7 seconds. Then Mr. Tanaka, very calmly, folded his napkin and placed it beside his plate. He stood up. He said in English, "I regret that I must withdraw from this evening's proceedings. My firm will be in touch with yours tomorrow." He bowed slightly to the rest of the table. He walked out. Madame Fontaine stood up next. She did not speak. She gathered her handbag. She walked out behind Mr. Tanaka. Herr Kurger stood up. He looked at Harrison Vale for one long, considering moment. He said, in heavily accented English, "Mr. Vale, I have done business with men I disagreed with. I have done business with men I disliked. I have done business with men I considered fools. I have never done business with a man who insulted a woman in my presence in a manner that required me to leave a room." He picked up his coat from the back of his chair. He walked out. "Mr." Al-Rashid stood up. He said very quietly, "The kingdom does not partner with men who lack adab." He left. Senhora Carvalho left without speaking. Signor Ricci left without speaking. Mr. Eze was the last to stand. He looked at Harrison Vale for a longer time than the others had. Then he reached into his jacket pocket, took out a pen, and very deliberately uncapped it. He held it up. He recapped it. He set it down on the table beside the unsigned contracts. He said, "In English, I came to Geneva with $200 million and a willingness to invest it with you." I am leaving with $200 million and a willingness to invest it with the people who have just walked out of this room." He left. Harrison Vale sat alone at the table for 20 minutes. The candles burned. The contracts sat in their leather portfolios, pens uncapped, signatures missing. At some point, the head waiter came in to ask, very politely, whether he would like the bill. He said yes. The bill came. It was for 940 Swiss francs. He paid it. He left a tip of 0. He left the restaurant. By Monday morning, 3 of the 7 principals had publicly withdrawn from the joint venture. By Tuesday afternoon, the deal was declared dead. By Wednesday, 2 of Vale Capital's largest limited partners, both pension funds with significant overseas holdings, had requested a review of their relationship with the firm. By Friday, the Financial Times had published a long account of what had happened in Geneva, citing 4 separate sources who had been in the room. The phrase that had been picked up internationally was the one Mr. Eze had used to a reporter the next morning: "We did not lose a deal." We were given a warning by a waitress who turned out to be a doctor, and we were wise enough to listen. Harrison Vale's net worth, by the end of the quarter, had dropped by an estimated $190 million. Almost exactly the value of the deal he had not closed. 2 of his largest portfolio companies began searching, quietly, for new lead investors. His board, 6 months later, asked him to step aside as chief executive. He did so under the cover of a planned retirement. He retired to one of his 3 houses. The phone, by all accounts, stopped ringing. Adeze did not return to Lessines-Neyrar the following Monday. She had given her notice that same evening after the principals had left, with the kind of unhurried grace that the head waiter would later say had made him cry in the staff break room. By the end of that month, she had received 7 different offers of employment from people who had been in that dining room, or who had heard about her from people who had been. Mr. Tanaka offered her a position as a senior cultural advisor for his trading house's international expansion. Herr Kurger offered her a research fellowship at the foundation he funded in Munich. Madame Fontaine offered her a directorship at a Parisian think tank. Mr. Al-Rashid offered her a consultancy with the Saudi Cultural Ministry. Senhora Carvalho offered her a chair in linguistics at a private university in São Paulo. Senior Ricci offered her, charmingly, a job he did not entirely have the authority to offer, but assured her he could create. Mr. Eze offered her, simply, the chance to come home to Lagos and help build something. She took none of them at first. She thanked each person individually, in their own language, in handwritten letters she sent by courier. She spent 6 months traveling. She visited her parents in Lagos. She visited her husband's grave in Cambridge for the first time since the funeral. She sat for a long time on the porch of the house, where her grandmother had taught her the proverb about how the road rises to meet a person who walks honestly. Then, with the quiet of a woman who had finally decided what she was for, she founded a small institute in Geneva, funded jointly by 4 of the 7 principals who had been in that dining room, devoted to the study of linguistic dignity in international commerce. The institute trained interpreters, advised diplomatic missions, and ran a single annual scholarship in the name of a 4-year-old girl whose mother had once needed work that did not require her to speak in front of people she cared about. Every December, on the anniversary of that dinner, the institute held a small reception in a private room at a restaurant in Geneva. Lessines-Neyrar always sent a representative. The 7 principals always sent gifts. And Adeze, standing at the door of the reception in a quiet dress and without an apron, greeted each guest in their own language, by name, with the steady candlelight kindness of a woman who had learned, slowly and at great cost, that being unseen was not the same as being absent, and that some silences end not with a shout, but with 7 sentences spoken in 7 languages by a woman a billionaire had failed to look at.